One of the big things that we talk about when we talk about email copywriting is the subject line. Because so much depends on getting that subject line right.
Yeah.
Right. So because of that, people ask a lot of questions about subject lines, and they read a few blog posts on the subject lines, and then you walk away with these ideas, which are not always as set in stone as they sound when you read about them. So knowing that we must always be testing, right? That subject lines are actually pretty easy to test in most email platforms. I'd really like to talk about top techniques or recommendations when you're putting together those tests for subject lines. So what do you do?
Yeah, so I do a lot of different things, and it always comes down to understanding who the recipient are and the environment they receive your email. I think if you start there, you can usually come up with some good ideas for testing, and there are so many variables that you can't control, and so it's not a matter of being black and white on what to do and what not to do. It's more about picking out recommendations and saying, okay, I'm going to try this for the next couple months and see if that makes sense for the emails I'm sending. Yeah. And with any copy or whenever you're trying to get someone to respond, people will always respond to emotion as opposed to logic, right? So one of the first things that I try to do whenever I'm writing email subject lines or testing them is I want to really try to elicit an emotional response. Because when people scan their inbox, they see emails from anyone and everyone, and what will catch someone's attention when there's so much that they're scanning are how they respond. And this happens on a subconscious level, and I'm going to get into that in a second, but I think when you write or even rewrite your subject lines, you want to try to get to an emotional angle of what you're doing. So this could be curiosity, urgency as to why this should open, relevancy as well, like why should they care about your subject line, trust, if you can get that through, and instant gratification is key as well in terms of, okay, if I click to open this email, then I want to get something in return, right? So you want to keep that in mind too. Fear and authority can go a long way in terms of how you're conveying and trying to communicate on what level you're trying to communicate. So keeping the length there too is another thing that we'll get into in a second, but you don't need to have it really short or really long in terms of, or in the middle. What matters is how many words do you need to elicit a response? Sometimes that's more than 5 words. Sometimes that's 3 words maybe, or even 1 word sometimes. You see people testing "hey" as a subject line, and so when people see that, like that's sort of a curiosity angle, because you go "hey" and then "hey," and you want to find out what's next. So.
Yeah, or it sounds personal too, right? Like, oh, is that person really just writing to me? Like, is this not like a newsletter? It's like a thing. It's like, oh, hi.
Exactly.
What's going on, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that no matter what emotional angle you're trying to get to, people are asking themselves, the second thing I want to really drive home is why open and why now? Like, why should I open this and why should I open it now? And I'm sure you know this. I'm sure everyone who watches this knows as well. You're always scanning your inbox and you're trying to pick out which email to open first, because you might have 10 unread or 20 or 200 unread emails. And so you're trying to make a decision like, why should I open this and why should I open it now? As opposed to, tomorrow or next week, which never happens. So just understand that a subject line exists for the purpose of answering those 2 impulses and those 2 questions. And then that's it. You don't need to write a novel. You don't need to really be clever about it. You just have to have someone respond, okay, yeah, I'll click and open this and see what's going on. And so these 2 first points really falls into my next point here, which is you want to communicate on a deeper emotional lizard brain level. And that sounds more awful than it is. And basically, neuromarketing is very useful. It's a buzzword in a sense, and a lot of people are tagging on to it, but it's useful because it helps you understand that we are emotional and often irrational creatures. And so there are 6 things that you can use to communicate on a deeper level with people. And people are motivated and driven by self-centeredness often, not selfish and egotism, but just self-centered. They live in a world where they're the main character. Right. They respond to contrast. They respond to tangibility, something that's real and concrete. They respond to a beginning and an end. It starts somewhere and it goes somewhere. They respond to visual stimuli and also emotion. So in your subject line, the more emotion you can elicit, the more, even like if you can plant an image in their head within 10, 9, 8 words, then that's going to go a long way to getting people to open. And so this is where the whole long versus short versus middle length of a subject line comes into play. And here, I don't think that you should necessarily only preach one or the other. I think a short or long subject line can work really well. As long as that short or long serves the purpose that we've talked about already, the emotions, the lizard brain, everything else, and also keeping it casual and friendly. The more official something feels to someone, the less likely they are to probably open it, because it feels like work. It feels like they have to do something. It feels like, I don't want to have to respond to someone else's demands on my time. And whereas their family or friends, they're usually sending them something funny, something easy, something they don't necessarily have to respond to. And so if a subject line keeps that tone and just communicates in a sense that's similar to maybe their family or friends, that will go a long way as well.
Yeah.
And one final thing I want to add to this too, which I always do, is I try to source subject lines from my audience, and not just ask them, hey, what would you respond to? But actually looking at what they are responding to in the general life of the interwebs. And I think there are some great places you can go to just get inspiration. Reddit is one of them. You can go to subreddits that belong to particular topics. So if you were sending emails about weight loss, you probably want to go to the weight loss subreddits and see what people are posting. What kind of headlines are they using for their posts? They get a lot of comments, right? You can use Google Suggest by typing in keywords and seeing what Google suggests that you search for. Popurls.com is great for just it curates and collects like the top headlines in different topics and different websites, so you can see what's trending. You get a good sense of, okay, these headlines are trending right now within particular themes or topics. And obviously the classic, which which you've always preached about, Joanna, is using Amazon to do message research. And so you look for book titles, or you might even peruse the review section just to see, okay, what are people writing that's short and succinct and that people tend to respond to. So, sourcing subject lines for your audience, either using short or long, but casual and friendly subject lines, making sure that you're tapping into a deeper emotional lizard brain level. You always want to answer the why open and why now, and just make sure that people are responding not in a logical sense, but they have an emotional response to a subject line, like curiosity, urgency, or anything else. So those are kind of the 5 things that I would definitely keep in mind, either to write or to test email subject lines.